Welcome to Leading Beyond Limits, the podcast where we explore the extraordinary journeys and insights of remarkable leaders who have pushed the boundaries of what's possible. Your host, Angel Radcliffe, who is a digital transformation leader, author, speaker, and financial educator, will lead each episode and dive deep into the stories, strategies, and philosophies that have empowered these exceptional individuals to lead, inspire, and achieve beyond the ordinary. We're about to embark on a journey of discovery and inspiration, and together, we'll learn what it takes to lead beyond limits. So grab your cape, or at least your favorite coffee mug, because we're about to unravel the extraordinary tales of trailblazers who've turned impossible into I'm possible. Let's get started.
Welcome to Leading Beyond Limits. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, Kat Newport. Kat is a dynamic force in leadership evolution, conflict coaching, and personal awareness. She's also the author of Smart Conflict, Turning Disputes into Growth Opportunities, and the founder of Oculus Inc. Kat will bring a wealth of expertise and passion to our discussion today around managing conflict for leaders. So tune in and let's discover how to turn disputes into growth opportunities. Kat, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Angel.
I am super excited to have you on and discuss a highly favorite topic of mine. I always say everything is a favorite topic, but this one is definitely a favorite topic, conflict management. And I know we both have a background in conflict management, so this is going to make for a really great conversation. Before we get started, Kat, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about what led you down this journey and what makes you passionate about this topic.
For sure. So I am a recovering executive. So I spent many years, and I won't say how many because it makes me feel old, spent many years in the corporate world dealing with quality assurance, project management. You want conflict, there's two for you, and organizational development. And over the years, there were many lessons learned from how not to manage conflict. That generated that interest in how does conflict work? Where does conflict go? And once I left the corporate world, it's, hey, why not write the book I've always wanted to write? I also work with an organization that deals with conflict in estate management and estate planning. You want conflict, go for family, money, and transitional life experiences. There's some stuff going on there, and mediation for general public and businesses.
Awesome. It sounds like you have a very extensive background. And I know every situation that we walk through in life, there are conflicts. There's going to be a conflict at home, there may be a conflict at work, at school. And one thing that I have constantly seen is many people avoid conflict. People don't like it, no matter what your position is, your role, if you're in a C-suite position, whatever type of leader you are, most people tend to avoid conflict. Is that something that you've seen as well along your journey?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have this idea of what conflict is, and we expect the worst outcome. All of these bad things happened in the past with my conflicts, therefore, they're going to happen again in the future. So, to protect ourselves emotionally and mentally, we do have that tendency to, I'm just going to stuff those feelings way deep down inside and hope this resolves itself somewhere in the future. And we do jump into that avoidance thing when all conflict is really is a difference of opinion. And when we reframe it in such a sort of light and non-threatening kind of way, it becomes a little bit easier not to avoid conflict.
That is very true. And I mentioned to you that I facilitate a course around conflict management with Cornell. And one of the first discussion questions in that course is asking the students, how do they deal with conflict? Are they a smoother? Do they withdraw? And I've been facilitating this course for 2 years now. I have had the honor to work with thousands of students, and I can say more than 90% of those students always say they withdraw from conflict. And I find it so interesting. Many of these people are in high executive roles, and I'm like, wow, it was just so eye-opening. And one of the things that I've seen that's been a very fluid discussion is how companies are using conflict to draw out new decisions and come up with new ideas, and there are all these companies that are now encouraging disagreements at work. You can have healthy conflict, and I think many people fail to realize that. It's a difference of opinion, but it doesn't always have to be negative.
I absolutely agree. You've hit on something that I'm really passionate about. And I think it's one of the biggest takeaways that I've had through working with conflict is that conflict equals creativity. If you never engage in a conversation with someone who has a different perspective than you, all you have are your ideas to go on. And if you're only looking at your ideas, it makes it really difficult to innovate. It makes it really difficult to build something new, something dynamic, something that your clients really want, something that'll take your organization to the next level. So if you can reframe conflict to look at it as conflict equals creativity, again, it takes some of that sting, some of that emotional hesitancy out of engaging in a respectful conflict.
Kat, that's so true. And what I'd like you to do is just really share with us some key principles around conflict resolution that leaders should be aware of. You have all these issues on the table. Most people are tending to disagree and do it in a negative way. You'll see people raising their voice and holding a grudge. But what are some things that leaders can do to really navigate and turn this into a positive outcome?
I have a five finger punch here, and it goes with smart conflict. So the first thing that I like to do is make sure that you know what you're in conflict about. I know that sounds silly, but make sure you understand the situation. I see a lot of times we get into an argument or a conflict where I just want to feel better, but I'm not really addressing the core issue. So before stepping into a conflict situation, make sure you know what you're having the conflict about. The second piece here is to measure your emotional response. Having a conflict with another person isn't designed to make you feel better. It's designed to resolve the issue at hand, or at least come to a negotiated settlement that everybody can be relatively satisfied with. Making sure that you're able to manage your own emotional levels is super important. Then I go to agenda. Make sure what you want the outcome to be. It's not a nefarious agenda. It's not a bad agenda. It's shared with the other person. When we're finished this conversation, I would really love to have X, whatever X may be. Sharing that agenda so you're moving forward in the conflict as opposed to stuck in that, no, this is what happened, or stuck in some other feedback loop. The fourth one is super important. Conflicts are about relationships. You have a relationship with the people you work with to varying degrees of depth and intimacy. Make sure you're looking at that relationship and how you want that relationship to move forward. Sometimes we go into conflict and it gets so heated that we forget that we're going to have to come to work tomorrow morning and face this person again. So make sure you're looking at that relationship. And then the easiest one to manage is the last one, which is the time and place for conflict. You don't have to have your conflict right now when your emotions are high. Hit pause, unpack that a little bit, then come back to it. And on the flip side of that, back to our conflict avoidance piece, don't wait so long that the conflict becomes difficult to address. So that's my five finger punch for dealing with conflicts in the workplace.
And you mentioned some things that really hit home. You talked about measuring the emotional response, and I think that has a lot to do with emotional intelligence. There are so many people that lack that quality, and I tend to think it's more natural. But when you think about falling in line with measuring the emotional response, emotional intelligence, for people where that quality isn't natural, is there a suggestion that you can give for them to be more tuned in?
So this is where the pause button comes into play. If the EQ or that emotional intelligence is a little bit in the development stage, let's say, making sure you're not forging ahead on old habits. So hit that pause button, stop that typical or normal response that you would usually have. Give yourself a chance to unpack the situation a bit, cool those emotions a little bit, and then deliberately re-engage with the conflict in a different way. So choose to engage in a different way as opposed to relying on those conflict habits you may have built up over time.
Perfect. And I tend to think conflict, not 100% of the time, but sometimes it's just due to miscommunication. And it can be something so simple with restating what the ask is or restating the issues on the table so everyone has a great understanding. Or here are two other things, really. When you're creating a meeting, making sure that you have a set agenda, sending a follow-up after the meeting, and so everyone really understands what's happening. What other suggestions can you give to help leaders avoid that miscommunication?
So you're absolutely right. Communication differences are the number one reason we get into conflict, followed very closely by unclear expectations. As a leader, make sure what you're asking your colleagues and your folks to do. Make sure that not only is it clear to you, but it's also clear to them. Time constraints are another one of the top four reasons why we do get into conflict. So make sure you have a realistic expectation on when you need and want tasks done. Make sure you're allocating the right resources, the right amount of resources to reduce the possibility of having time constraints or time crunches so that we can take the edge off those conflicts. And the last one that rounds out the top four are opaque performance standards. So making sure that everybody knows what's expected within their own individual context, but also the context of their team. So if Sally needs to do A before Johnny can do B, we need to make sure that's super clear.
Perfect. Now, Kat, I'd like to share some examples of what I've seen. And over the last 15 years of working in corporate, I've been in very positive environments, very toxic environments, and somewhere there was just a huge question mark. Why is no one discussing the issues on the table or the elephant in the room? So here's a situation in a team meeting, and let's say there's 10 people on a team. You're also there with your client. And there's always that one team member who wants to be the standout, call other people out. Maybe they are going for a promotion. Some environments are very cutthroat. And so let's say you have someone who's constantly calling out another team member and trying to show that they're incorrect or showing how the information they're presenting is wrong. And you have the rest of the team there, you have a client. How can a leader deal with that situation, especially someone who's not used to dealing with conflict? What's the first step they should take?
Based on the scenario you've given me, as a leader, you obviously know this individual is a bit bombastic, already has this tendency to do this in the meetings. My first recommendation when dealing with conflict ties to the time and place I was talking about. If we can get to this individual beforehand, and speak with them about the expectations. So again, this goes back to those clear expectations and a clear performance standard. In this meeting, this is what we're trying to do. I know you're looking for that promotion. I know you enjoy speaking. This is what we want to do. If this is a bit nerve-wracking and knee-shaking for a leader who's not totally confident with conflict management, I also encourage you to take a look at your intent. What do you want the outcome of this conversation to be, and why are you having this conversation? Do you want this person not to say anything in the meeting at all? Are you trying to give them different ways to come to the attention of upper management so that they can get that promotion they're looking for? What is your intent as a leader going into that conflict? So this goes back to that agenda piece and that five-finger punch I was talking about. What do you want out of it? If we transition into the moment and our colleague decides to go down the road of their old habits, this gives you that opportunity to step in saying, I hear you. Can we please let Johnny finish what they were saying before you jump in, Sally? So recognizing that, yes, you have a very valid point. This also comes into corporate culture. What are the expectations? And you mentioned this, if it's a cutthroat type of culture, this might become habit and old hand. So what do you as a leader and how do you as a leader engage with that corporate culture moving forward? And this comes into a little bit of that soul searching for you. How does this fit? How do we make this work with the overarching corporate culture?
True. A lot of that you said, it's just like hitting home. And I think some of what you said aligns more with open communication. I know we talked about leaders communicating with their team and just having clear communication, but open communication is something that's a little bit different. How can leaders foster open communication channels to prevent conflicts from escalating?
So this comes down to how you present yourself as a leader. So we all have habits. We all have we've picked up things from mentors. We've picked up things over the years. So if we can take a look at leading our teams with empathy, I think it goes a long way to opening those lines of communication. The old style of command and control leadership is slowly going the way of the dodo. It's slowly becoming extinct. And this empathetic leadership style is becoming more needed in an environment where we have 5 generations all working together, all with different experiences. So, what do I mean when I empathetic leadership style? This is talking about emotional intelligence, controlling your own emotions in the situation. What does that look like? This looks like refraining from judgment. It's so easy to judge. Refraining from judgment before you have all the facts, reacting with curiosity, going in and saying, wow, Johnny, you're really bombastic in meetings. You really want to talk. Why is that? What's driving that? How do you, what are your goals? How do you want to move forward in this organization? Reacting with that communication piece, that emotional empathy piece, to try and figure out what paths your team is on to support them better. You're no longer expected, I think, as a leader to have all the answers. Your responsibility as a leader now is to give the framework to your team so they can perform optimally, not only for themselves, not only for you as their leader, but for the organization as a whole.
I like that, giving the framework to your team because so many times as leaders, we have that information and how we want things to go. And we're not sharing like those frameworks because maybe it's ours and it's proprietary. And we're like, hey, this is mine. I don't necessarily want anyone to know my strategies. But sometimes it's essential to share that with the team so they can have a great understanding of what that foundational approach is. And there's some teams that have different communication styles. There are some teams that are used to, as I mentioned, having those healthy conflicts. There are some teams that are used to being quiet and withdrawing and never discussing those conflicts. When you think about communication styles and approaching conflict with different personalities and people and teams with different communication styles, are there any particular approaches that you would recommend?
So beware the assumptions. What comes to mind as you were talking on my side. Beware the assumptions. We make assumptions that other people know what we're thinking. We make assumptions that other people should, there's the nefarious word should react or act in a specific way in this sort of situation. So we really need to take a look at what assumptions we're making in a workplace. And you hear this a lot when you get into the Johnny really should have done this. We've got to look at those assumptions and make sure that we're super clear on what we're expecting. And again, we're back into this open communication and those performance standards. And this also goes into social norms. So, what are the social expectations in this team? What is the social expectation in this organization? And really laying that out and evolving with that. No organization is static. So making sure that as the organization and as your team evolves, that those assumptions are addressed again and again to make sure that they're evolving along with that.
Kat, you're dropping so many gems. So I hope whoever is listening is really taking some notes and looking how to incorporate these methods into their day-to-day working as a leader, even as a team member, because you don't necessarily have to be a leader to be engaged in conflict or to be in that particular situation. But I want to get into more of successful conflict resolution. I know we've been discussing how do you approach conflict, how do you deal with conflict, communication, all of these various things. But when you look at everything as a whole, what are some examples of successful conflict resolution?
So if we're looking at successful models, I really like the mediation kind of bell curve to it. When we're looking at a conflict, it's important at the beginning of it to get all the cards on the table. We really need to understand where all the players are coming from and what their perspective is and what their thoughts are and how the conflict is affecting them so that we can understand the whole situation. This is the part that people fear an awful lot because it can get a little tangly with the emotions. It can get a little heated. It can get a little threatening when people are presenting ideas and thoughts and perspectives that differ from your own. So this is that discomfort piece that comes with conflict, but it's really important because without that, getting to a resolution, an effective resolution, is really difficult. So that ramp up on that bell curve is to get all the cards on the table, make sure all the players are identified and engaged in the conflict resolution. That top of the bell curve is really understanding what needs to happen. So what do I need in this situation that's a drop dead must have? So if my department needs the information 3 weeks in advance of deployment, and this is drop dead because I need 3 weeks to do this, this is one of those drop dead pieces. However, I'd really like it in writing, in a format, in a form, that kind of thing. If I can flex on that a little bit and give a little bit to my colleagues and put that negotiation piece out, it's super important. So basically what I'm saying here is make sure you know what your drop dead no-go things are, and not everything is a drop dead no-go thing. And what you can negotiate on. What can you do with the give and take? And then when we're on the back of that bell curve, making sure we have understanding, solid bullet points of, yes, Sally's going to do this, Johnny's going to do this, Mohammed's going to do that, Henri is going to do this, making sure that we all know what's going to happen from that point forward. So that get the cards on the table, make sure you're addressing all the drop dead points, negotiate the rest, and then have a really clear outline of where to go next.
Those are great tips, and I love how some of those are, very actionable. I love when we can provide something to listeners that they can do or implement right away. And I think some may even just take some time and a thought process to think things out and build your own framework as a leader, if not using someone else's. But even with these particular techniques, there are still going to be maybe some loose ends, right? There's still going to be some mistakes that leaders will make when trying to resolve conflict. So, what are some of those common mistakes that you've seen?
Common mistakes. Number one, not following up. That's really clear here. Just because the conflict, and you can't see my air quotes, but just because the conflict is over doesn't mean it's over. We've agreed to A, B, and C. You got to follow up on A, B, and C. You've done a lot of work in putting emotional intelligence on the table and discussing needs and wants and perspectives and perception. Build on that. Don't just, oh, thank goodness the conflict is over. Now I don't ever have to deal with it again, because that's not entirely the truth. You've got to continually improve on your style, and you've got to follow up on the points you've agreed to. So I think that's number one. Number two, start building that into the culture, in your team culture at the very least. We've done the really hard thing of having this really hard conflict, and we learned a lot. We're starting to make this normal. We're starting to move away from this being emotionally impactful and gut-wrenching. Start making it the normal thing. Is there anything anybody wants to bring up at the meeting right now that we have to hash out? Make it normal. So following up on the points, very practical, and then start building that into the culture of your team.
More great advice. Thank you so much, Kat. Those are very great tips. And I know earlier in the show, I mentioned how many companies are using conflict to their benefit as far as coming up with new ideas and ideation sessions. Can you share some tips for leaders on how they can learn and grow from conflicts to improve their leadership skills?
Absolutely. I would recommend actually using conflict as a driver for innovation, like actually creating it. Don't think I'm crazy. Hang on. Just bear with me here. For example, coming into a meeting where you've really got to solve a complex problem at your organization, give everybody a stack of sticky notes and say, I don't care how crazy your perspective is. I don't care how crazy your idea is. Write your idea on that sticky note and stick it on the wall, and then write another one and stick it on the wall. This ideation gives us the opportunity for everybody to put their ideas out there, everybody to, in a non-threatening, non-confrontational, nobody's going to call me crazy kind of way, put it all up on the wall and see what all the perspective is. This opens up the door. You're not always listening to the loud people in the room, the people who are confident speaking in the room. You're actually going to get those ideas from everybody. So you can see how everybody's seeing the problem. This gives you that innovation piece. The de Bono method, the six hat method is also another really great way to use conflict or alternative thinking in your meetings and in your innovation, where you're looking at the problem as a team from different perspectives deliberately. Everybody's going to look at this from a probability standpoint. What are the best things that could happen? Now everybody's going to look at this from a standards and legal framework action. What do we got to worry about? Now everybody's going to look at it from this way. This gives us opportunity to put the shoes on of other people, because some of us are really great at looking at things from standards and legal. Some of us are really great at looking at it from the Eeyore perspective. Oh, everything's going to go wrong and here's the list. And some of us are really great at, oh, this is going to be fantastic and these are all the things that could come out of it. But this gives us that opportunity to put on the shoes of another colleague and another framework of thinking and really stretch ourselves in a safe environment.
I love the sticky note idea, and that's something that I've utilized before. It's more like coming up in a way to categorize, and I tend to do like the lanes and like red, yellow, green, and then you have your parking lot, you have your brainstorming, and I think it definitely helps with creativity. You mentioned innovation, so many things to help the team move forward, but it's also recognizing everyone's ideas. So it's not necessarily just saying no, you still have ideas on the board, so everything's still visible and it may be useful down the line. Thank you so much, Kat. And I know you're an author, and I love that. Your book, Smart Conflict, Turning Disputes into Growth Opportunities. It sounds very interesting. I will have to check it out. Tell us more about it and where can we find it?
Absolutely. It drops in paperback and hardcover on the 26th of March, 2024, so later this month. It's currently available for pre-order on Amazon. What is Smart Conflict? So this is the book that based itself on a workshop and program that I developed when I was in corporate. So once I retired from corporate and came out into the world, this is one that stuck with me. This is a super important topic. So it goes through the 5-finger punch that we talked about earlier in the podcast. How do we manage all of these things? It's got some really practical insights from my corporate experience and some personal experience, and how I've gone through some of those tangly and sticky situations so that maybe you don't have to go through those tangly and sticky situations too.
We will list the link here in the show notes so everyone can go and check out the book. And Kat, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciated your insights. You have so much expertise around leadership and conflict resolution. There's so many more topics that we can discuss just from this one episode. So I would love to invite you back down the road to have another conversation with us. I just have one last question for you.
Absolutely.
In your journey as a leader, what is one piece of advice or lesson that you've learned that you can share with our listeners?
Always pick up the opportunity. When something floats by and you don't think you can do it, give it a shot. You don't know what you can do until you try.
Thank you for tuning into another inspiring episode of Leading Beyond Limits. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to hear more from our incredible guests, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to us. And if you have a remarkable leader in mind who you'd like to hear on our show, or any questions and comments, feel free to reach out to us. You can find our contact information in the show notes. Remember, leadership knows no bounds, and with the right insights and determination, you too can lead beyond limits. Until next time, keep reaching for the stars and leading with purpose.